My aunt willed me her cabin, but my parents tried to steal it until they discovered what was inside, and I swear, they'll never look at me the same again. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name's Ria Cole. I'm 27, and for the first time in years, I went back to my hometown in northern Montana. The reason wasn't happy. My Aunt Miriam passed away. She was my mom's older sister, and the only person in my family who ever really cared about me. While my parents chased money and social status, Aunt Miriam taught me how to find peace in simple things. Coffee on the porch, a walk through the woods, quiet moments that didn't need to be filled with words. When I sat in that lawyer's office for the reading of her will, I expected nothing. My parents, Diane and Russell, sat beside me, dressed in black and pretending to be heartbroken. The lawyer cleared his throat, opened the folder, and started reading. When he said the words, "I leave my cabin and all its contents to my niece, Ria Cole," the room went silent. My mom's smile froze. My dad blinked like he hadn't heard right. Then my mom spoke in that sharp voice she always used when she felt cornered. "There must be a mistake," she said. "The cabin was supposed to stay in the family." The lawyer looked at her calmly. "It is. Miss Ria is family." I didn't know what to say. I loved that cabin. I'd spent summers there as a kid, learning to fish and listening to Aunt Miriam tell stories about the stars. But I never imagined she'd give it to me. My parents didn't congratulate me. They just stared. I could almost see the calculations forming in their eyes: property value, taxes, resale profit. By the time we left the office, I could tell they were furious. A week later, I drove up to the cabin alone. The road wound through tall pine trees, and the air smelled like rain and wood smoke. The cabin stood just as I remembered, small, sturdy, with faded red shutters and a porch swing that creaked in the wind. But something about it felt different. Still, waiting. Inside, everything was untouched. Her coat still hung by the door. A half-burned candle sat on the windowsill. There were boxes of letters, photographs, and a heavy lock on a door near the kitchen, a door I didn't remember from before. I ran my hand over the old wooden table where we used to play cards. For a moment, I felt like she was still there. But as I stood in that silent room, I couldn't shake the feeling that Aunt Miriam had left me more than just a cabin. She had left a secret, one my parents would do anything to find. I used to think every family had a little distance, but mine felt built on it. My parents never really looked at me, not unless they needed something to brag about. They loved spotless houses, perfect smiles, and people who listened instead of felt. When I was little, I learned to stay quiet, to make myself small in rooms where love should have been loud. Aunt Miriam was the only one who saw through that. She'd pick me up on weekends, feed me pancakes, and tell me my silence wasn't a flaw. It was how you survived noise. Now she was gone, and my parents acted like they'd lost their best friend. My mom wore black every day, talking about sisterhood to anyone who would listen, though I hadn't heard her speak to Miriam in years. My dad nodded along, pretending grief, but their eyes told the truth, calculating, impatient. They couldn't stand that the cabin was mine. One night, I walked past the study and heard them whispering. My mother's voice was sharp, low. "There has to be a way to challenge it," she said. She wasn't thinking clearly when she wrote that will. My father's reply was colder. "We'll find a lawyer who can fix this. She won't know what hit her." They didn't notice me standing there, barefoot in the hallway, clutching a mug that had gone cold. I didn't speak. I just turned and walked back to my room, something inside me hardening. I realized they weren't mourning my aunt. They were mourning what they didn't get. The next morning, I packed my car and drove to the cabin without telling them. The closer I got, the lighter I felt. The sky opened wide, the air clean and sharp against my face. When I reached the clearing, the cabin stood just as before, quiet and waiting. The steps creaked under my boots, and when I opened the door, the scent hit me, a mix of cedar, soap, and that faint floral perfume Aunt Miriam always wore. It felt like walking into a memory that hadn't realized time had passed. There were photos along the walls, her and me by the river, her with a fishing pole twice her size, a picture of the two sisters when they were young, smiling before everything went wrong. The letters on the kitchen table were stacked neatly, as if she'd planned to read them again. I ran my fingers along the furniture, tracing the dust. The silence was soft, not lonely, but full. I could almost hear her humming. Yet under that calm, something tugged at me, a small unease. In the corner, near the pantry, a heavy door caught my eye. Metal glinted where a padlock hung tight against the wood. It didn't match the rest of the cabin. It felt secret, deliberate. I tried the handle once. It didn't move. The lock was old but firm. I stepped back, staring at it for a long time. For reasons I couldn't explain, the air there felt colder. A week after I moved in, my parents called to say they were coming up for the weekend. My mother's voice was sugary, too smooth to be real. She said they just wanted to help me organize, maybe bring a few things from the old house. I knew better, but I didn't argue. Part of me wanted to see how far they'd go. They arrived early, both dressed like they were visiting an open house, not a cabin in the woods. My dad barely said hello before wandering through the living room, hands behind his back like a buyer inspecting property. My mom followed close behind, her eyes darting from shelf to shelf, her smile tight. "This must be worth something," she said, picking up a small porcelain figurine from the mantel. "Your aunt always had an eye for antiques." I told her it wasn't about the things, but she only half listened. She started making piles, silverware here, crystal there. "We should take stock," she said lightly, "so nothing gets lost or misunderstood." My father nodded, already pulling out his phone. I caught the quiet click of a camera shutter as he took pictures of the furniture. I watched in silence, trying not to show how angry I felt. Every photo, every whispered word between them, chipped away at the small piece I'd built since moving in. My mother moved from room to room, muttering numbers under her breath. At one point, I heard her in the bedroom, voice low but clear enough to catch. "If we sell just the furniture, that could cover a down payment," she said. My father grunted in agreement. I stepped into the doorway. "You don't need to do that," I said quietly. She turned, startled, then smiled like I was the one being unreasonable. "Oh, honey, we're just making sure everything's accounted for. It's what Miriam would have wanted." Something in me twisted. I almost laughed. The woman who hadn't spoken to her sister in years now suddenly cared about what Miriam wanted. They stayed for dinner, though it felt more like a business meeting. My dad kept checking his phone. My mom sipped her wine and stared at the walls like she was measuring them. When they finally said goodnight and went to the guest room, I felt a strange relief. The cabin seemed to exhale when they closed the door. But sleep didn't come easily. Around midnight, a faint creak pulled me from half-dream. Then another. The sound of careful steps on the porch. I held my breath and listened. Through the thin curtains, I saw the faint glow of a flashlight moving along the window frame. My father's voice came first, low and urgent. "Try the side door." My mother's reply was barely a whisper. "Keep quiet. She's a light sleeper." I didn't move. I just listened as the steps circled the cabin, the boards groaning under their weight. That was the moment I stopped pretending. They weren't here to help me settle in. They were here to take everything they could, no matter what it cost. Morning came gray and silent after that long, uneasy night. My parents had left before sunrise, pretending they had errands in town, though I knew it was really frustration that drove them off. The cabin felt heavier once they were gone, like it was holding its breath again. My eyes kept drifting to that door by the pantry, the one sealed shut by a thick, rusted padlock. I'd avoided it for days, but now the thought of it gnawed at me. Whatever Aunt Miriam wanted hidden there, it had to matter. I found an old hammer in the shed. The metal felt cold in my hand. When I struck the lock, the sound echoed through the house. It took 3 blows before the shank snapped loose. Dust swirled in the air as I pulled the door open, revealing a narrow staircase leading into darkness. A chill rose from below, damp and earthy, carrying a scent like time itself. I grabbed a lantern from the kitchen and descended, one step at a time. The stairs groaned under my weight, and my heartbeat matched each creak. At the bottom, the small light spread across a low ceiling and stacks of boxes lined against stone wall. Each box was carefully labeled in Aunt Miriam's neat handwriting, dates, names, places. She'd cataloged everything like a historian of her own life. I opened the first box. Inside were photos from decades ago. 2 young women smiling in front of a storefront, arms around each other. My mother and Aunt Miriam. Their faces were almost identical, but Miriam's eyes held warmth my mother never had. Another box contained envelopes, some yellowed with age. I pulled one free and read a letter addressed to Russell and Diane. My aunt's handwriting trembled, yet the words were sharp. She accused them of forging her signature, of stealing her share of a business they'd built together. I dug through the papers, hands shaking. There were contracts, receipts, even legal drafts never filed. Everything she said was backed by proof, dates, bank statements, signatures that matched but shouldn't have. My mother's name appeared again and again beside transactions that bled Miriam dry. The company my parents bragged about all my life wasn't built by them alone. It had started with both sisters and ended with betrayal. At the bottom of one box lay a small envelope sealed with wax. My name was written across it. I hesitated before opening it, afraid of what waited inside. There was a single folded page and a silver locket I remembered her wearing when I was little. The note read, "The truth is yours now. Protect it, and protect yourself." I sat on the cold floor for a long time, staring at the words until they blurred. She hadn't left me the cabin for comfort. She'd left it to hand me a weapon. Every photograph, every document was a piece of the revenge she'd spent her last years building. This place wasn't just a home. It was her final reckoning, and now it was mine to carry. The letter from the basement haunted me for days. I couldn't eat without tasting metal, couldn't sleep without hearing the echo of that lock snapping open. I tried to stay quiet, to keep the discovery to myself, but silence didn't last long. My parents called again, this time through their lawyer. The tone was cold, practiced. They were filing a petition. The claim was that I had unduly influenced my aunt during her final months, that I'd taken advantage of her fragile state. Hearing those words made my chest tighten. They wanted to paint me as the villain. They wanted everything erased, the truth, the memories, even the love that connected me to Miriam. Soon papers arrived by courier, formal letters, demands for statements, requests for mediation. My father's signature appeared at the bottom of every page, bold and confident, as if he believed a pen could rewrite the past. My mother didn't call once. She let her lawyer speak for her. Each accusation stung worse than the last. Claims of manipulation, deceit, greed. The same greed that had lived in them all along. I spent my evenings at the wooden desk near the window, going through more of Miriam's boxes. I searched for anything that could defend her memory, anything that could prove how wrong they were. The deeper I went, the more I saw how carefully she'd prepared everything. There were drafts of letters she never sent, notes scribbled on napkins, bits of thoughts that led in circles. It was like she'd been building a trail for me to follow long before I ever knew I'd need it. One night, while rearranging photos on the wall, a small frame slipped from the nail. The glass cracked, and behind the picture I saw something taped to the back, an envelope. Inside was a tiny brass key and a folded note. The handwriting was faint but familiar. When you're ready, look beyond the cabin. The answers aren't all here. There was no address, no instructions, just a key and those few words. On the envelope flap, she had written 3 numbers. 217. It hit me suddenly. It wasn't random. It was the name of the local bank in town, the one Miriam used for years. I held the key under the lamplight, its surface worn smooth. My pulse quickened. She'd known this day would come. She'd known my parents would fight. The cabin wasn't the end of her plan. It was only the beginning of it. Outside, rain started against the windows, soft at first and then steady. I looked toward the locked basement door, now open, and felt her presence stronger than ever. The truth she'd guarded wasn't finished speaking. Whatever waited behind that key, she'd left it for me to find, and I was ready to follow where it led. The key felt heavier than it should have as I drove into town the next morning. The rain from the night before had turned the roads slick, the world washed in gray. The bank sat at the corner of Main Street, a quiet brick building I remembered from childhood errands with Aunt Miriam. I hesitated at the door, half afraid of what waited inside, but something in me pushed forward. The manager led me to a small room and handed me a narrow metal box. My name was written across the top in Miriam's handwriting. My fingers trembled as I turned the key. Inside, everything was arranged with the same precision she'd shown in the basement. Envelopes tied with string, a stack of photos, several folded documents sealed with a notary stamp. The air in that little room seemed to tighten as I lifted the first page. The documents were statements, signed by former partners, accountants, witnesses. Each told the same story in different words. How my parents had falsified forms, altered records, and quietly pushed Miriam out of the business they'd started together. There were copies of bank transfers, fake signatures that matched my mother's handwriting perfectly, and a final letter from Miriam's lawyer confirming her share had been stolen. My throat burned as I read. All those years my parents bragged about their success, about their hard work. They'd been standing on what they took from her. She had carried that wound in silence, while they pretended to have no idea why she'd walked away. Among the papers was a smaller envelope addressed simply to me. I opened it with shaking hand. They took my life's work, so I left them a truth that will destroy theirs. I read it again and again until the words blurred. I imagined her sitting at this very desk, writing it slowly, knowing exactly what it meant. She hadn't wanted revenge through lawyers or shouting. She wanted justice buried deep enough that only I could dig it up when the time was right. The photos beneath the letter showed them together in the early days. 3 smiling faces in front of their store, arms linked, the future bright. Then later pictures, fewer smiles, more distance. I could almost see the betrayal forming in the space between them. I gathered everything back into the box, careful not to leave a single page behind. On the drive home, my mind raced between fury and heartbreak. The power in those papers could end everything my parents had built. It could clear Miriam's name forever. But under that anger, something small and painful lingered. Hope. Hope that maybe, somehow, they'd look at me differently if I confronted them. Hope that family could still mean something. As the cabin came into view through the trees, I knew what waited next. I had her truth now. Whether I used it or not would decide what kind of daughter I was and what kind of woman I'd become. Late one afternoon, while the fog still clung to the trees, I heard tires crunching over gravel outside the cabin. When I stepped onto the porch, I saw my parents climbing out of their car, dressed neatly, as if they were attending a meeting. A man in a dark suit followed behind them, holding a briefcase. My stomach tightened. They hadn't called, hadn't warned me. My mother lifted her hand in a stiff wave. "Ria," she said, her voice too bright. "We thought we'd stop by. It's time we had a calm talk, don't you think?" I didn't answer. My father smiled the way he did when he wanted something. "We brought someone who can help straighten things out," he added, gesturing to the man beside him. "Just a little legal matter. It'll make everything easier for you." Inside, the air felt thick with tension. The lawyer spread papers across the table and started explaining something about estate simplification. My mother nodded along, eyes fixed on me, waiting for me to sign. My father leaned forward, tapping a pen against the page. "It's just a formality," he said. "This way, you won't have to deal with taxes or maintenance. We'll handle everything." I stared at the documents. My name was there in bold print, followed by a clause transferring full ownership of the property to. My pulse thudded in my ears. "You want me to give it up?" I said quietly. My father frowned. "Don't be dramatic. It's for your benefit." Something inside me snapped. "No," I said. "It's for yours." The room went still. The lawyer looked uncomfortable, glancing between us. My mother's polite smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. "Sweetheart, we're just trying to help. This place is too much for you. You're alone here. Let us take care of it." Her voice was soft, almost convincing, but I could hear the tremor beneath it. I pushed the papers back toward them. "You're not taking anything," I said. "Not again." My father's face hardened. "What did you say?" "I know what you did to her," I whispered. "Every lie. Every stolen signature. Every dollar you took." He froze. My mother's hands trembled slightly before she hid them in her. "Ria," she said, her voice thinning, "you don't understand what you're talking about." I reached into my bag and laid a stack of photocopied documents on the table. "I understand perfectly," I said. "Miriam kept everything. The contracts, the bank transfers, even the confession you made her write." The lawyer's eyes widened. My father's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. My mother's color drained as she stared at the papers. For the first time, her face showed something real, not anger or performance, but fear. When she finally spoke, it came out as a whisper. "You weren't supposed to see any of that." "I did," I said. "And now you can't hide from it." For a long moment, no one moved. Then her mask cracked completely, and I saw the truth behind it. Guilt, small and ugly, finally exposed. The air inside the cabin felt heavy, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. My father stood stiff by the door, his jaw locked, while my mother sat pale and silent at the table. The papers between us were scattered now, a mess of truths that couldn't be buried again. I wanted to end it there, to tell them to leave, but something in me hesitated. There was one box I hadn't opened, one Aunt Miriam had marked with my mother's name. It sat on the top shelf of the bookcase, untouched since I'd moved in. The label was simple, for Diane. I crossed the room and lifted it down. My mother's eyes followed every movement. "What is that?" she asked quietly. I didn't answer. The lid came off with a faint sigh of dust. Inside were old photographs stacked neatly, each one capturing a time before everything soured. Two sisters at a county fair, laughing, them on a lakeshore, feet in the water, both standing beside a wooden sign that read Miriam and Diane's General Store. My mother's hand trembled as she reached for one picture. "I'd forgotten this," she whispered. Beneath the photos was a small black recorder, its surface worn smooth. A yellowed note was taped to it, "Play me." I pressed the button, and after a soft crackle, my aunt's voice filled the room. "Diane," she began, her tone calm but tired. "I don't know if you'll ever listen to this, but I need to speak somewhere you can't talk over me. I loved you more than anyone, and you turned that love into something I couldn't survive. You took everything we built and made it yours alone. You called it ambition. I called it betrayal." My mother's lips parted, but no words came. The voice on the tape continued, steady and clear. "This cabin was the only place that didn't hurt to remember you. I left it to Ria because she understands what kindness feels like when it's quiet. She's the only one who knows what love means." The room went completely still. I felt tears sting my eyes, but I didn't look away from my mother. My father shifted uncomfortably, muttering something under his breath, but even he couldn't disguise the guilt creeping across his face. The message went on for another minute, soft and deliberate, describing how the business had fallen apart after the theft, how Miriam had rebuilt her life with what little she had left. "I forgave you 100 times in silence," her voice said, "but forgiveness doesn't erase truth, and truth always finds its way home." The tape clicked off, leaving only the sound of the wind brushing against the windows. My mother stared at the recorder like it might speak again. Her shoulders slumped, her expression hollow. My father turned toward the door, unable to meet my eyes. In that moment, their power broke. The lies, the pride, the performance, all of it dissolved. What was left between us wasn't anger anymore. It was emptiness. It was the sound of a family finally seeing itself clearly, and realizing there was nothing left to save. The morning after the recording, the house felt hollow. My parents left without a word, their footsteps fading down the porch steps like ghosts retreating into the woods. I watched their car disappear down the road, not with anger anymore, but with a kind of quiet understanding. They had built their world on lies, and I finally held the proof that could bring it all down. I spent the next few days sorting through Miriam's boxes again, organizing every file, photo, and document she had left behind. It wasn't revenge I wanted, it was balance. Justice that didn't require shouting or cruelty. Among the folders, I found the business cards of her old lawyer, a man named Harold Kentucky. The name felt familiar. He'd been at her funeral, standing in the back, silent but watchful. I drove to town and asked to see him. When I handed over the evidence, his expression changed from surprise to something close to admiration. He promised to take care of everything discreetly. "Your aunt always said truth doesn't need noise," he told me, slipping the papers into a folder. "Just patience." Weeks passed. I didn't hear much, but I didn't need to. The signs came slowly at first. Rumors from the grocery store, whispers at the diner. Someone mentioned audits, investigators asking questions, names being pulled from old records. Then the local news began reporting that the Cole family business was under investigation for financial misconduct. I didn't gloat, I just listened. My mother's face never appeared in public again. My father's name vanished from the company's sign, replaced by someone new. They sold their house in a hurry, disappearing to some smaller town where no one knew what they'd done. Whatever pride they'd lived on crumbled. The people who used to admire them now crossed the street to avoid them. I didn't need to speak a word. The truth carried its own weight. Out here, the cabin stayed still and quiet, just the way Miriam liked it. I repaired the porch swing, planted herbs by the window, and spent evenings reading by the fire. Sometimes, I'd hear the faint creak of wood or smell the familiar scent of cedar and perfume drifting through the rooms. It felt like she was still here, watching, satisfied that I'd finished what she started. One night, as the sun slipped behind the trees, I walked outside and looked toward the hills. The world felt clean again. I didn't feel guilt for what had happened to them, only a strange peace. They'd taken so much from her, but in the end, she'd taken back something greater, the truth. The cabin stood as it always had, strong, quiet, untouched by greed. I realized then that revenge didn't need fire or fury. Sometimes it only needed truth, and the courage to let silence do the rest. Spring arrived quietly, the snow melting from the hills, and the trees blooming in soft green. The cabin no longer felt like a relic of the past. It was alive again. I spent my mornings tending the small patch of earth beside the porch, where I'd planted wildflowers in every color I could find. It was the only place that felt right to mark Aunt Miriam's resting spot. I didn't need marble or words carved in stone. She'd never wanted grandeur. Just beauty in simple things, things that grew. I spoke to her while I worked, telling her how the world had shifted since everything fell apart. The silence wasn't heavy anymore, it was peaceful. The wind carried birdsong instead of tension. The air didn't feel thick with secrets. The cabin had become what she intended it to be, a place where truth could finally breathe. Months slipped by, each day folding into the next. I got used to the rhythm of solitude, coffee at dawn, the smell of pine through the window, the sound of rain tapping against the roof at night. Sometimes, I'd imagine her humming in the kitchen, the same tune she used to play while cooking. The thought no longer hurt. It felt like home. Then, one gray morning, I noticed an envelope lying on the floor just inside the front door. No footsteps, no knock, just the soft shape of paper against wood. My heart tightened when I saw the handwriting. Elegant, slanted, too familiar. No name, no return address. I sat at the table and opened it slowly. "You won, but you'll always be alone." No signature, no emotion, just those words pressed into the page with sharp, deliberate strokes. For a moment, I felt the echo of her voice in my head, that same tone she used when I disappointed her as a child. But the sting faded almost as quickly as it came. I looked around the cabin, the books on the shelves, the sunlight spilling across the old rug, the flowers visible through the window, and realized how wrong she was. This wasn't loneliness. It was peace. I folded the letter neatly and set it beside the recorder on the shelf, where my aunt's voice still lived inside the small machine. The two of them, mother and sister, side by side at last, one bound by guilt, the other by love. I poured myself a cup of coffee and moved to the window seat. The morning light stretched through the glass, landing on the worn cushion where Miriam used to sit and read. Dust floated in the beam, glittering like quiet confessions. I closed my eyes and felt the warmth on my face. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of their shadows. The cabin was mine, not because a piece of paper said so, but because I'd earned the peace that came with it. I smiled faintly, whispering into the stillness, No, Mom. I'm finally free. Hey, besties. Thanks for staying till the end of this wild story. Imagine your own parents trying to steal what your aunt lovingly left you, only to be destroyed by the truth she hid inside those walls. Crazy, right? Sometimes karma doesn't need shouting. It just needs patience. If you enjoyed this emotional roller coaster, don't forget to like, share, drop a comment, and subscribe for more real stories. See you next time.